Hey guys, welcome back to more r/entitled parents Reddit stories. In today's Ripestories video, imagine your narcissistic parents are so obsessed with controlling you that even after you move out, they hire a private detective to enforce their crazy rules from across the city. Here are the extreme lengths I had to go to finally stop them from ruining my life. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is a story from r/entitled parents and is titled "Entitled Parents Hired Private Detective to Make Sure I Follow Their Rules Even After I Moved Out." So to give you some background on my situation, I need to explain just how controlling my parents were. Growing up, I did not have a normal childhood or a normal young adult life. My father and mother are the definition of narcissistic and entitled. In their minds, children are not separate human beings with their own thoughts and feelings. To them, children are extensions of themselves, basically property that exists to make them look good to the outside world and to obey their every single command. The rules in our house were completely suffocating. Even when I became a legal adult and was working a full-time job, they treated me like I was a misbehaving child. I had a strict curfew, and I was expected to be inside the house early in the evening, and if I was even a few minutes late, they would lock the deadbolt and make me stand on the porch while they yelled at me through the door about how disrespectful I was to them. They also demanded full access to my finances, and my paycheck went into a joint bank account that my mom monitored constantly. If I bought a coffee, she would interrogate me about why I was wasting money. They had tracking apps installed on my phone, and they demanded that I keep my bedroom door open at all times. Privacy simply didn't exist in our home. If I tried to push back or set a boundary, my dad would puff out his chest and yell about how it was his house, his rules, and that as long as I breathed his air, I would do exactly as I was told. It was an exhausting, miserable way to live. I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid setting off their explosive tempers. I missed out on so much socializing because I was too afraid to ask for permission to go out with my coworkers. I realized that if I didn't get out of there, I was gonna lose my mind entirely. I knew I couldn't just tell them I was moving out. If I gave them any notice, they would sabotage me. They would drain the joint bank account, take my car keys, or literally stand in the doorway to physically block me from leaving. I had to be smart about it, and I had to be secretive. My escape plan started with my finances. I went to a completely different bank on my lunch break at work and opened a new private account. I went to my company's HR department and asked them to switch my direct deposit to this new account starting the following month. Next, I needed a way to communicate that my parents could not monitor. I went to an electronics store and bought a cheap prepaid smartphone with cash. I kept it hidden in my desk at work or locked in the glove compartment of my car. I used that phone to start searching for apartments, and it took a lot of searching, but I finally found a small, affordable place on the other side of the city. The landlord was a really understanding guy, and I explained to him that I was leaving a toxic family situation and needed to be discreet about it, and he agreed to help me push the paperwork through quickly. I spent weeks slowly moving my most important possessions out of my parents' house. I would stuff a few items of clothing or important documents into my work bag every morning and then transfer them to the trunk of my car when I got to the office. I slowly stockpiled my things in the trunk until I had enough to survive, and the day I finally left was the most terrifying and exhilarating day of my life. My parents had told me that they were going to a distant relative's house for a family gathering and would be gone for the entire afternoon. The second their car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I grabbed several large trash cans from the garage, brought them inside, and started throwing the rest of my clothes and personal items into them to carry out to my car. This was faster than packing boxes. I scrubbed my room clean so they couldn't claim I left a mess. I left my old phone, the one with all the tracking apps on it, right in the middle of the kitchen counter. Next to it, I left a short, firm note. The note simply said that I was moving out to live my own life, that I was safe, and that I would contact them when I was ready. I told them not to come looking for me. My hands were shaking as I locked the front door for the last time. I got into my car and drove away, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure they had not turned around and come back early. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my new apartment complex, I just sat in the driver's seat and cried from sheer relief. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on my chest for my entire life was suddenly gone. The first few weeks in my new place were amazing. The apartment was incredibly small and I barely had any furniture, but it was mine. I could leave my bedroom door closed now, I could eat whenever I wanted to, I could stay up late watching movies without anyone bursting into the room screaming at me for wasting electricity, and I ignored the endless emails my parents sent to my old email address. They ranged from furious demands that I return home immediately to manipulative messages claiming they were worried sick that I was breaking their hearts. I set up a filter to send their emails straight to a hidden folder so I wouldn't have to look at them. I was finally happy and I was starting to figure out who I was without them breathing down my neck. But the peace didn't last long. A couple of months into my new life, strange things started happening. It started with a feeling of being watched. I would be walking to my car after work and feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then I noticed a plain dark gray car parked on the street outside my apartment building on multiple occasions. At first I told myself I was just being paranoid. I knew that leaving an abusive environment can leave you with hypervigilance, so I tried to brush it off as trauma, playing tricks on my mind, but then a coworker pulled me aside at the office. She looked really uncomfortable and told me that a strange man had approached her in the parking lot during her smoke break, and she said the man had shown her a picture of me and asked if she knew me. He claimed that he was an old friend trying to track me down, but he asked really invasive questions. He wanted to know what my work hours were, if I was dating anyone, and if I'd been going to bars or drinking after work. My blood ran cold. And by the way guys, just to quickly interject here, if you had horribly narcissistic, insanely entitled parents like these, what would you have done if you were in OP's shoes? And by the way, if you enjoyed the stories about crazy entitled parents, then please don't forget to like the video and leave me some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. Thank you so much. So I thanked my coworker for telling me and asked her to point the guy out if she ever saw him again. My mind was racing. Who was asking about my drinking habits and dating life? There was only one logical answer, but it seemed too insane to be real. A few days later my landlord called me and he sounded confused. He said a man had come by the building asking questions about my visitors. The man had specifically asked the landlord if I'd been having guests over late at night or if I was throwing loud parties, and the landlord had told the guy to get off the property, but it confirmed my worst fears. Someone was actively investigating my daily life, and I decided I was not gonna live in fear. I'd worked too hard to escape my parents' control, to now let them drag me back into their twisted reality. I started keeping a close eye on the street outside my apartment and the parking lot at my job, and sure enough, the following Tuesday, I saw the dark gray car again. It was parked across the street from my local grocery store. Just as I was walking out with my groceries, I could clearly see a guy sitting in the driver's seat holding a camera up to the window, pointing it right at me. Anger completely took over me. I dropped my groceries in my trunk, slammed it shut, and marched straight across the street towards the gray car. The guy in the driver's seat scrambled to put his camera down as I approached, but he was not fast enough. I slammed my hand into his window. He rolled it down just a crack, looking annoyed and a little nervous. I looked him dead in the eye and demanded to know who he was and why he was following me. He tried to play dumb at first, claiming he was just waiting for a friend. But I told him I knew he had been talking to my landlord and my coworkers, and I pulled out my phone and told him I was dialing the police right then and there and to report him for stalking and harassment. That got him to finally crack. He sighed heavily, held his hands up and admitted he was a private investigator/detective. He told me he was hired by my parents and I demanded to know what his instructions were. He explained that my parents had paid him to conduct regular surveillance on me to ensure I was maintaining a wholesome lifestyle. They wanted him to check if I was violating their family rules, even though I didn't live with them anymore. They wanted to know if I was drinking alcohol, if I was dating, and if I was gonna sleep at a reasonable hour. They literally hired someone to enforce their insane household rules from a distance, and I was so disgusted I felt physically sick. I told the private investigator that I was a grown adult and that my parents were abusive, and that if I ever saw him near me again, my home or my job, I would press charges for stalking. The guy looked embarrassed, muttered an apology, and sped off. I was absolutely furious. I drove back to my apartment, walked inside, and immediately dialed my mom's number from my prepaid phone, and she answered on the second ring. Before she could even get a word out, I demanded to know why she and Dad hired a private investigator to follow me. I heard my dad get on the line, likely listening on another extension. They didn't even try to deny it. In fact, they sounded proud of themselves. My dad confidently told me that they had every right to know what I was doing. He said that just because I threw a childish tantrum and moved out didn't mean I was exempt from the family's moral standards. My mother chimed in, claiming they were just fulfilling their duties as parents to make sure I was not falling in with a bad crowd or ruining my life with bad habits. They genuinely believed they had the authority to police my behavior in my own home on my own time, and I told them they were completely unhinged. I told them their need for control was pathological and that they were suffocating me. I stated very clearly that they were to never contact me again, never send anyone to follow me again, and to consider me dead to them. My dad started screaming, calling me ungrateful and a failure, and he yelled that I would never survive without their guidance and that I would be begging to come back within a month. I didn't say another word, I just hung up the phone, blocked their numbers, but hanging up wasn't enough. I knew my parents. I knew their egos could not handle being told no, and I knew they would not let this go. They would escalate. If the private investigator wouldn't do it anymore, they would show up themselves. So I decided I needed legal protection. I went down to the local courthouse and filed a petition for a restraining order against both of my parents. The clerk helped me fill out the paperwork. I detailed the history of their controlling behavior, the financial abuse, the final straw of them hiring someone to stalk me at my home and workplace, and the temporary order was granted. I was able to make the order permanent a bit later, and my parents still tried to paint me as a troubled, confused young adult who desperately needed their guidance, but the evidence of their stalking was undeniable. They had no real defense for hiring someone to photograph me and interrogate my landlord. The order was made permanent, barring them from contacting me and coming near my home or coming near my place of employment anymore. But of course, toxic people don't just accept defeat gracefully. They had what is often called an extinction burst. Since they couldn't contact me directly without risking arrest anymore, they deployed their flying monkeys. I now started getting calls and messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins who I hadn't spoken to in ages. My parents had spun a wild narrative telling the extended family that I joined a cult or suffered a mental breakdown and that they were just loving parents trying to save me. I heard from my cousin that my mom had been crying at family gatherings, playing the victim and acting like she had no idea why I had turned so cruel. I refused to play their game though. Whenever a family member reached out to try and guilt-trip me into talking to my parents, I sent them one single message. I explained that my parents had hired a stranger to stalk me and that a court had found them to be enough of a threat to grant a restraining order. I told them that if they continued to advocate for my abusers, they would be blocked too. Most of them did not believe me or tried to excuse my parents' behavior, so I ended up blocking a large portion of my extended family. It hurt to lose them, but it was necessary to protect my peace. My parents even tried to show up at my apartment complex once about a month after the court date. My landlord saw them pacing near the entrance and immediately called the police. My parents were escorted off the property and given a stern warning that their next violation would result in jail time. That was the last time they ever tried to come near my home again. Update: it's been quite a while since all of this happened, and my life has completely changed for the better. Once the constant stress and fear of my parents were removed from my life, I started thriving. At work, my performance skyrocketed because I was no longer exhausted and distracted. My boss noticed my hard work, and I recently got a major promotion with a significant pay raise. I can actually afford a much nicer apartment now, and I bought myself a reliable car without needing anyone's permission or having to explain the purchase to anyone. I also finally got to experience the social life I was denied for so long. I made amazing friends, I joined local clubs for my hobbies, and I go out whenever I please. Nobody waits by the door to yell at me when I get home, and best of all, I started dating. I met an incredible partner who treats me with kindness and respect. We have a healthy, supportive relationship built on trust, which is something I never witnessed growing up. I spent a lot of time in therapy working through the trauma of my childhood, and I've learned how to set healthy boundaries. I'm no longer that terrified, controlled person who had to sneak around just to survive. I went no contact with my toxic, narcissistic parents, and I protected myself with a restraining order, and I built a successful, happy life entirely on my own terms. Getting away from them was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but it was absolutely the best decision I ever made. They thought I would fail without their rules, but their absence was the exact thing I needed to finally succeed. And yeah guys, even though the story was already horrifying enough, the whole PI thing is where this goes from just toxic family, which is bad enough on its own, to genuinely terrifying. I mean, they did not hire him because they were worried about you being missing. They hired him to see whether you were dating, drinking, staying up late, having guests over and so on. That is just deeply unhinged and crazy. And OP, you were absolutely right to get a restraining order, especially after they showed up at your apartment, even after being legally told to stay away. And guys, if you had awful parents like this, how would you have handled this situation? Let me know in the comments, I'm very curious. And a user on Reddit said the following: hiring a private investigator to monitor your adult child's dating life, drinking habits, sleep schedule and visitors is completely unacceptable. That is not what you call parenting, that is just surveillance. They crossed a massive line, and honestly, I understand why you felt unsafe enough to get legal protection. Another Reddit comment said, you were an adult working full-time, earning your own money, and they still controlled your bank account, tracked your phone, enforced curfews and invaded your privacy. That is not strict parenting, that is just abuse and coercive control. And the next one is titled, fine then, I would just take the paternity leave. Posted on r/malicious compliance. So many years ago, I was a sales manager for the now defunct Circuit City. My wife and I were expecting our first child. This was in 1999. My wife was leaving her place of employment as she was planning on staying home with our daughter once she was born. Being our first child, I wanted to be home for a little while at the beginning. As I was talking to my store manager to arrange having some time off when my daughter was born, I asked for a week off. I was met with opposition and told I could only have 2 days off because we don't have extra management coverage. Yet we somehow cover people's vacations. This was of course absolutely ridiculous, and luckily I had done my homework already. The way the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act law is written, parents can take up to 12 weeks of maternity/paternity leave, and their job is guaranteed to be waiting for them when they return. I believe this was meant to be combined between the parents, but since my wife was leaving her job permanently and not taking maternity leave, that left 12 weeks available for me to take. Paternity leave is rarely ever done because it's most often unpaid leave. I, however, had plenty of PTO saved up, vacation and sick time, so I informed the store manager that I would be filing for paternity leave under FMLA and would in fact be taking 12 weeks off and would be using my saved PTO to cover my income. He tried to argue with me, but I told him he should probably go contact HR. Well, he returned later that day and sheepishly asked me if I would accept the week I originally asked for, and I told him that I would accept 2 weeks or 12 and that the choice was his. Well, I ended up with 2 weeks, and that store manager learned that though I was young at the time, I was not gonna be pushed around, and that reasonable requests should be reasonably accepted. And the next one is an entitled parents story, which is titled, told to change one student's grade, so I changed them all. So for context, I moved to a new state to take a high school teaching job in a rural town. I liked my fellow teachers and almost all my students, but this was a small town with the usual assortment of outsized attitudes. One student was particularly lazy though. Her parents both worked in the small school district, admin at the high school, teacher at the MS, and she rarely turned anything in on time, and what was turned in was generally rushed or incomplete, as if she had gotten the instructions secondhand. Somehow though, she had straight A's in all her classes, and I quickly figured out why. When she turned in another late, incomplete assignment and I very generously gave it a D, her overall grade in class dropped to a B, and I was called in the next day to a meeting with the principal and both her parents, who immediately complained that I was being unfair and capricious with my grades. They accused me of not giving students the instructions, so I showed them the instructions paper, which I passed out and went over in class. They essentially accused me of not giving her specifically a copy, but I remember handing it to her and I told them why. She was making out with her boyfriend when I was trying to go over the instructions. They didn't like hearing that part, by the way, and they accused me of not being clear with the deadline, but it was the second line of the directions. They then accused me of not fairly grading her work, but when I showed them her work, they clearly hadn't seen it before and wondered whether I'd gotten assignments mixed up before I showed them her name on it. The principal asked me to change the grade in the gradebook, and I asked about whether she would have to redo the assignment first, but that was declined by her parents. I understand why my principal caved though. It wasn't worth trying to fight two employees in a small rural district already struggling to recruit people, so I went back to my classroom and changed every student's grade to a 100 in the gradebook. No special treatments, even the ones who hadn't turned in a single thing got a perfect score. The fallout? Well, many students asked me why their grade changed, but I never addressed it. I would just brush them off saying not to worry about it, though clearly rumors were spreading like wildfire in the small school, because even the secretary and the principal asked me about it later on. I only said that yes, I changed her grade. The principal looked like he wanted to ask me about why I changed all the grades, but he just shrugged and walked away. He never interfered in my gradebook after that. Also, the student's parents transferred her out of my class and her boyfriend also transferred a day later. No more PDAs in my class finally, so no complaints. And the next one is another story from r/malicious compliance and is titled "Wife Forced to Give Extra Credit Assigns It to the Parents." So my wife teaches a lovely group of kids in an area where parents are super strict. The children are almost all operating within the A grade range and their parents overwork them to ensure an A+. Anyways, the new school year has some parents pestering my wife for extra credit assignments. She insisted that it is optional for her to assign extra credit, and they have raised the issue up through administration to force her hand. Another teacher who teaches the same class gives loads of extra credit, and they want their kids to be on an even level. With the news that she would have to match the amount of given extra credit opportunities, she has now decided to involve the children's parents. For example, 5-page handwritten and legible essays about a historic event they were a part of, 20-minute video interview of their opinions and experiences about certain political events while growing up. Her extra credit is just many different little assignments that take lots of time from the parents' day for an extra couple points on the next exam. While she continues to assign these extra credit assignments, the participation rate has been 0. And yeah guys, thanks for watching. I will also give you an extra credit assignment. If you love my stories, please check out my playlist on the left, and I will see you again tomorrow.